Ease. You're a Hell's Angels man, Emily said, staring at the sabotage brake line coiled in her hand like a dead snake. Ease. Somebody tried to kill you tonight. Dax looked at her, this young woman covered in grease at midnight, holding the proof of his murder attempt as calmly as if she'd found a loose bolt. Ease. And you fixed it anyway, he said quietly, without asking me a single question. Emily set the brake line on her workbench and reached for a clean one. Ease. You needed help, she said. That's the only question that mattered. Ease. If a stranger showed up at your door at midnight, broken, bleeding, and riding a motorcycle that someone had rigged to kill him, what would you do? Emily Carter opened her garage door anyway. Ease. And that one decision changed everything. Welcome to the channel. Ease. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end because you won't believe where it goes. Ease. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. Ease. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain started around 9 that night. Ease. Emily Carter heard it before she felt it, a low drumming on the metal roof of the garage that her father had built with his own 2 hands 22 years ago, one corrugated panel at a time. Ease. On a piece of land at the edge of Denton, Texas, that nobody else had wanted. Ease. Carter Cycles. Ease. The letters on the sign were still in her father's handwriting. Ease. Painted by him in 1000. Ease. 999 in dark green against white. Ease. And she had never changed them because she couldn't bring herself to paint over the last thing in this town that still looked the way he'd intended. Ease. She was on her back beneath a 2019 Indian Scout, flashlight clenched between her teeth, working on an oil pan gasket that had no business being as stubborn as it was. Ease. The owner wanted the bike back by Thursday. It was currently Tuesday, which meant midnight Tuesday. Ease. Which meant she had roughly 36 hours to finish this one and get started on the 2 others waiting in the far corner, a customer's vintage Triumph that needed a full carburetor, rebuilt, and a beat-up 2014 Sportster that had come in with Ease. An electrical fault she hadn't fully diagnosed yet. Ease. 3 by 36 hours. Herself. That was the math she lived inside now. Ease. She turned the flashlight up toward the gasket, locked her jaw around it, and kept working. Ease. She didn't let herself think about the envelope on her desk. Ease. The envelope had arrived certified mail on Friday morning, forwarded from her father's old attorney, a man named Gerald, who had handled the estate with the cheerful competence of someone doing the bare minimum required by law. Ease. The return address on the envelope was Meridian Property Solutions, LLC, and the letter inside had used the word compliance 11 times in 4 paragraphs. Ease. She'd counted. The core of it was simple enough. Her father had signed a financing agreement in 2019 to get emergency capital to keep the garage running during a rough stretch. Ease. And that agreement had a balloon provision that Gerald apparently hadn't explained clearly and that her father apparently hadn't fully understood. Ease. And that balloon was now due. Ease. And it was large. Ease. And she had 60 days. Ease. She had read the letter twice. Ease. Put it in the envelope. Ease. Put the envelope in the middle drawer of the desk. Ease. Closed the drawer. Ease. And gone back out to the garage to work. Ease. That was Friday. Today was Tuesday. She had not opened the drawer again. Ease. The Indian's gasket finally gave way at 11:47, and she let out a breath that was mostly relief and a little bit prayer. Ease. She slid out from under the bike, sat up. Ease. Pulled the flashlight from between her teeth. Ease. And pressed the back of her wrist against her forehead. Ease. The garage smelled the way it always smelled, oil and metal and rubber, and the faint chemical ghost of solvent, and that smell was the closest thing to comfort she had left in this building. Ease. She was reaching for a shop rag when she heard it. Ease. She stopped moving. The sound was coming from the road outside. She could hear it even over the rain, and it was wrong in a way she recognized immediately because she had been listening to motorcycles her entire life. Ease. Her father had taught her to hear engines the way other fathers taught their daughters to hear music. Ease. There was a Harley out there, and it was in trouble. Ease. The idol was ragged. Ease. Cutting and catching. Ease. And there was something else underneath it. Ease. A rhythmic grinding she didn't like at all. Ease. And the whole mechanical voice of it was telling her what no rider ever wanted to hear. Ease. I am almost done. Ease. She was already standing. Ease. She pulled the garage's side door open and stepped out into the rain. Ease. And the headlight hit her almost immediately, a single beam, swinging wide and unsteady from the road into her lot. Ease. And she could see the rider wrestling with the machine. Ease. Both hands locked on the bars, the bike weaving in a way that had nothing to do with the wet asphalt and everything to do with the fact that the man controlling it was operating at the very edge of what his body had left to give. Ease. The Harley made it 15 feet into her lot before it stopped, not gently, not gracefully, but in the way machines stop when they have simply spent everything they had. Ease. The engine coughed twice and went silent. Ease. And the man on it held himself upright for a long moment. Ease. One boot on the ground. Ease. Both hands still gripping the bars. Ease. His chest working hard against whatever it was costing him to still be vertical. Ease. Then his left arm buckled. Emily was moving before she thought about it. Ease. She crossed the wet concrete in 6 steps and got her shoulder under his arm before he went all the way over. And he was heavier than he looked, which was already heavy, because this was not a small man. Ease. He was somewhere around 50 or 55. Ease. Broad-shouldered. Ease. Wearing a soaked leather vest over a soaked flannel shirt. Ease. And when she got close enough to see his face in the spill of light from her open garage, ease, she saw that there were blood mixing with rainwater on the left side of his temple, and his pupils were uneven. I've got you, she said. Not gently, not shakily. Ease. She said it the way her father used to say things, like a declaration of fact. Ease, I've got you. Don't fight me. Don't need, he started. Ease, you fell sideways on a motorcycle in a parking lot, she said. Ease, you need something. Come on. She got him inside. Ease. She sat him on the metal stool she kept beside the parts bench, the one her father used to call the throne, because he'd always gone there when he needed to think, and she got a look at him in the full light of the garage. Ease. Late 50s, she revised. Maybe right at 60. The kind of man who had been powerful for a long time and still carried it in his frame even when the rest of him was struggling. Ease. The leather vest had patches on it, and she didn't look at them right away because she was focused on his head. Ease. What hit you, she asked, already moving to the first aid kit on the wall. Ease. The road. His voice was low and rough. Came off around mile marker 12 on 380. His bike went sideways. You hit the asphalt? Left side. Ease. Mostly shoulder. The helmet took the head. He paused. Ease. Mostly. She came back with the kit and a clean rag. Ease. Sit still. She examined the temple wound without fanfare. It wasn't deep. The bleeding had mostly stopped. But the uneven pupils bothered her, and she said so. Ease. You might have a concussion. I've had concussions. Ease. That's not reassuring. She pressed the clean rag to the wound with one hand. Ease. Your pupils aren't the same size. That one, she pointed to his left eye, is bigger. Ease. You need a hospital. No hospital. He said it quietly, but absolutely. Ease. She looked at him for a moment. Why not? He held her gaze. Ease. Because I've got enemies who know which hospitals to watch. Ease. There was a silence in which Emily processed this information with the focused practicality of someone who had been raised in a garage and had learned early that some situations didn't benefit from asking every question you had. It's fine, she said. But if you pass out, I'm calling an ambulance. Ease. Fair, he said. She cleaned and dressed the wound with the efficient competence of someone who had sutured her own hand once with a needle and fishing line at 19 because the nearest urgent Fort care was 40 minutes away and she'd had a deadline. When she was done, she stepped back and looked at him. I'm Emily Carter, she said. This is Carter's Cycles. My father built it. He met her eyes. Daniel Walker, he said. People call me Dax. And now she looked at the vest. The patches she'd been avoiding looked back at her. The top rocker, the center patch, the bottom rocker. She'd been born in Texas and raised surrounded by bikers, and she knew exactly what she was looking at, and she held the knowledge of it steady in her chest without letting it change her expression. Dax, she said. Emily, he said. You want coffee? She said. It's midnight, it's raining, and I'm not done working. But I can put a pot on. Something moved behind his eyes. It wasn't quite surprise. It was closer to recognition, the kind that happens when you have spent a very long time preparing for a specific reaction and someone gives you a completely different one. Yeah, he said. Coffee sounds good. She put the coffee on, and while it brewed, she went back out to his Harley. She hadn't planned to do it right then. She'd planned to get him stable, make sure he wasn't actively dying, and then figure out what to do with both of them. Ease. But the bike was sitting in her lot in the rain, and she was a mechanic, and a mechanic can't leave a sick machine alone any more than a doctor can walk past a patient on the floor. Ease. She got the Harley inside the garage, out of the weather, and she looked at it under the lights. Ease. It was a Road King older, she'd guessed 2015 or 2016, the kind of machine that had been ridden hard for years and maintained by someone who knew what they were doing. Ease. The paint was genuine road-worn, not cosmetic. This was a bike that had been places. Ease. She started with the obvious, the reason the engine had been cutting and catching, and found it quickly. Ease. Fuel line connection had worked loose, probably from the fall, and the resulting inconsistent fuel flow had given the engine that ragged voice she'd heard from the road. Easy fix. She had the right fitting. She got it done in 8 minutes. Ease. Then she did what she always did when a bike came into her shop after a crash. She checked everything. She checked the front end. She checked the rear. She checked the electrical. She checked the controls. Ease. She was checking the brake system when she found it. Ease. She stopped. She crouched lower and looked again, turning the flashlight at a specific angle because she needed to make absolutely certain she was seeing what she thought she was seeing. She was. The rear brake line had not been damaged in the crash tonight. It had been cut. Not all the way through, not in a way that would announce itself immediately. It had been cut in a precise, deliberate way. Deep enough that it had been on the verge of failure for however many miles Dax had been riding. And it had finally given enough that the brake had gone soft. If he tried to stop fast on the highway, if a car had pulled out, if something had run across the road, the brake would have failed completely. And at highway speed, with one brake gone, and a man who had no reason to believe his equipment wasn't trustworthy, the result would have been a coroner's report, not a mechanic's bill. Emily knelt beside the bike for a long moment. The rain was still hitting the roof above her. The coffee had finished brewing, and she could smell it from the kitchen corner. She could hear Dax breathing from across the garage, steady now, which meant he wasn't actively deteriorating. She took a slow breath. Then she stood up, walked to her parts shelf, and found the brake line she needed. She was halfway through the repair when he spoke from behind her. You found something. It wasn't a question. She hadn't heard him get up, and she had the brief, detached thought that a man that size moving that quietly was a relevant data point. She didn't stop working. Sit back down. You had a head injury. Emily. She set the flashlight down and turned to look at him. He was standing 4 feet behind her, one hand on the workbench for balance, and his eyes were on the brake line she was replacing. She watched him look at it. She watched him understand what he was seeing. The old line, he said. His voice had changed. Where is it? She reached to the side and picked up the section of line she'd cut away. She held it up so he could see it in the light. See the cut. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. How long ago? Dax said. And his voice was very quiet. Do you think that was done? Given how far it had deteriorated and the pressure you'd have been putting on it at highway speed, Emily said. Not tonight. This was done sometime in the last day or two. Whoever did this knew exactly how much to cut. Not enough to fail immediately. Enough to fail when it would be catastrophic. Dax looked at the brake line. He looked at Emily. You're Hell's Angels, man, she said. Not an accusation, a simple statement. Somebody tried to kill you tonight. She set the cut brake line on her workbench. And you found your way here. He was quiet for a moment. You're fixing it, he said. Even knowing that. You needed help, she said. That's the only question that mattered. She finished the brake line repair at 1:15 in the morning. She tested the system twice. Applied pressure to the pedal. Checked the connections. Tested again. She verified the fuel line connection she'd already done. She went over the front brakes. The lighting. The throttle. The clutch. She did not do a half job. Her father had told her 10,000 times across a childhood and a young adulthood that a mechanic's reputation was built on the jobs nobody was watching. Anyone can do good work when someone's checking, he used to say. Ease. The work that makes you is the work you do alone at midnight when nobody'll ever know the difference. Ease. When she was done, she washed her hands at the shop sink and came back to where Dax was sitting on the throne stool. Again, she'd won the argument about him lying down on the break room cot by approximately 0% ease, which was the rate at which Dax Walker apparently accepted being told what to do, and she handed him a mug of coffee that was by now very strong and slightly overbrewed, and she didn't apologize for either of those things. He took it with both hands. He looked down into it. He didn't say anything for a moment. "What do you want for this?" he said. "Ease." "Nothing," she said. He looked up. "I don't charge for midnight emergencies," she said. "Ease." "My dad didn't either. I kept the policy." Dax Walker looked at her with an expression she would later describe to herself as something like a man revising an assessment he'd made quickly and now understood was incomplete. "Ease, your dad taught you the work?" he said. "Everything I know," she said. "Ease, he died 14 months ago. Left me the shop. Good man?" "Ease." She wrapped both hands around her own mug. "The best man I ever knew." "Ease." Dax nodded slowly. He drank his coffee. He was quiet for a moment in the specific way of someone deciding something. "Ease. The people who cut that line," he said. "They did it because I've been asking questions about something." "Ease. Something they don't want asked about." Emily waited. "Ease. There's a company," he said, "based out of Fort Worth. Ease goes by Meridian Property Solutions. Ease. They've been working through half a dozen counties, buying up small businesses, not cleanly using contract provisions that borderline legitimate attorneys wrote specifically to entrap people who don't read the fine print close enough. Ease. Small repair shops, restaurants, a machine shop in Louisville. Ease. A body shop in Gainesville." He paused. "A motorcycle repair garage in Denton." Ease. Emily went very still. Dax met her eyes. "They're the ones who hold the financing agreement on this property," he said quietly. "Ease, aren't they?" She set her coffee down. Her hands were completely steady. Ease. She was proud of that, later, when she thought about it. Ease. "How do you know about that?" "Because 3 other businesses got the same letter you got, on the same Friday, from the same certified mail origin point. Ease, and one of those business owners is a man I've known for 30 years. He paused. "Ease. He called me 2 weeks ago. I've been looking into it since then." Ease. "And 4 days ago, I got close enough to something specific that someone decided I needed to stop looking." Ease. Emily stared at him. "You came off your bike on Route 380, she said slowly. Ease. Mile marker 12. That's 8 miles from here. Ease. 6 miles from the Meridian Regional Office, he said. Ease. Which is where I was tonight before my brake line finished failing. Ease. The rain on the roof seemed louder suddenly. Emily turned and looked at the cut brake line sitting on her workbench. Ease. She looked at it for a long moment. "The letter they sent me," she said. Ease. "I've been ignoring it." "I know," he said. "Emily," he said her name like he was being careful with it. Ease. "I know you've been ignoring it because you're hoping it'll turn out to be a mistake or that 60 days is enough time to figure something out. Ease, it isn't a mistake. And 60 days isn't enough time. Ease. Not the way they've structured this." She turned back to look at him. Ease. "So what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that what you did tonight, the brake line, the repair, keeping that evidence," he looked toward her workbench, "you didn't just fix my motorcycle. Ease. You may have just given me something I needed. I kept it because it's evidence of what happened to you," she said. Ease. "Not because I was thinking about my garage." "I know that," he said. Ease. "That's why I'm telling you." There was a long silence. Ease. "What are you going to do about your brake line?" Emily said. Ease. "About who cut it?" Dax looked at her steadily. "Find out who specifically gave the order," he said. Ease. "And make sure the right people know what they did." Ease. "Legal right people," she said. "Or the other kind." Ease. "I've been doing this long enough to know the difference matters," he said. Ease. "And I've been riding long enough to know the answer I want to give you isn't always the answer that actually fixes things." He paused. Ease. "This one requires the legal kind. The other kind doesn't hold." Ease. Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once. Ease. "The brake line is in a plastic bag on the top shelf of my parts cabinet," she said. Ease. "The bag is dated, timed, and labeled with the work order number." Ease. "My father always said documentation was the mechanic's most important tool." She paused. Ease. "I'm starting to think he might have been right about more than motorcycles." Ease. Dax Walker set his coffee mug down on the workbench. Ease. He reached into the inside pocket of his leather vest and produced a card, plain white, just a name and a number, and he put it on the workbench beside the mug. Ease. Tomorrow morning, he said. Not earlier. You need to sleep. Ease. He looked around the garage at the Indian, still half assembled in the center bay, at the Triumph waiting in the corner, at the tools hung in precise order on the wall, the way her father had arranged them, and she had maintained them. Ease, you've got work to do first. Emily picked up the card. Ease, you're not staying. I'll be on the road before sunup, he said. Safer for both of us if I'm not here when daylight comes. Ease, she looked at the card, looked at him. Your head, she said. Ease, the concussion. I've had worse. That's still not reassuring. Ease, something that was almost a smile moved across his face. Ease, it was brief. Ease, and it was quiet. Ease, and it transformed him for just that moment into a man who had probably been warmer once. Ease, before whatever years of whatever it had taken to become Dax Walker had finished with him. Ease, thank you, Emily Carter, he said, for the brake line. Ease, for the coffee. For not asking questions a lot of people would have asked. Ease, my dad taught me. Ease, she said. Ease, that when a person comes through your door needing help, Ease, you don't interrogate them about why they deserve it. Ease, you just help. He was quiet for a moment. He sounds like he was something, he said. Ease, he was everything, she said. Dax Walker nodded once. Ease, he picked up the Road King's key from where she'd left it on the bench. Ease. He walked his bike out of the garage into the wet pre-dawn dark, and she stood in the doorway and watched the single headlight reach the road and turn south, and she listened until she couldn't hear the engine anymore. Then she went back inside. She stood at the workbench for a moment. The cut brake line was in its labeled bag on the parts shelf. The business card was on the workbench. The coffee pot was still warm. She pulled open the desk drawer. She took out the Meridian letter. She read it again. All 4 paragraphs. All 11 uses of the word compliance. And this time, she didn't put it back. She sat down at the desk and she read it again. More slowly. And she thought about everything Dax Walker had told her. And she thought about the 3 other businesses. And the man Dax had known for 30 years. And the specific Friday on which all of them had received their certified letters from the same origin point. She thought about her father, who had spent 22 years building something on a piece of land nobody else had wanted. One panel at a time, in his own handwriting. She picked up a pen. She started making notes. Outside, the rain was finally slowing. Down Route 380, somewhere in the gray pre-dawn, a Road King was riding south with repaired brakes and a fuel line that would hold. And the man on it was thinking about a young woman who had opened her garage door at midnight without asking why she should. Emily Carter worked at her desk until the sun came up. She had not solved anything yet, but she had stopped running from it. And sometimes that is the beginning of everything. Emily slept 3 hours. She knew it was 3 because she had looked at the clock on the desk when she finally put her pen down 6:14 in the morning, and she had set an alarm for 9. And when the alarm went off, she had lain on the break room cot for exactly 45 seconds before she swung her legs over the side and stood up. Because lying there longer wasn't going to change anything, and there was a Triumph carburetor that needed her. She worked through the morning on coffee and the specific kind of focus that arrives when a person has decided to stop being afraid of something. The notes she'd made in the early hours were sitting on the corner of the desk in a neat stack, and every time she passed the desk, she looked at them, and every time she looked at them, she felt something settle more firmly in her chest. Not courage exactly. Something quieter than courage. More like the moment before courage, when a person stops pretending the situation isn't what it is. The Triumph carburetor came apart cleanly and told her its problem immediately: a stuck float valve, the kind of thing that looks catastrophic and fixes in an afternoon if you know what you're doing. She had the parts. She began the work. At 10:40, she heard motorcycles. Not one, several. She counted the engines by sound the way her father had taught her, not individual cylinders, but the voices, distinct as people, and she got to at least 4 before the first one turned into her lot. Ease. She set down her tools. She had the professional composure to walk to the garage door rather than run to it, and she stepped out with her hands clean. She'd wiped them on the shop rag, and she looked at what had arrived in her parking lot. Ease. 6 Harleys, 6 riders, and Dax Walker at the front of them, not looking like a man who had ridden off in the pre-dawn rain with a freshly dressed head wound and a recently repaired brake line. Ease. Looking, instead, like a man who had slept exactly as long as he needed to and arrived exactly when he'd intended. Ease. He swung off the Road King and stood in front of her, and the morning light showed her that his pupils were even again, and the dressing on his temple was clean, which meant someone had changed it. Ease. I said I'd be in touch, he said. You said, tomorrow morning, she said. Ease. It's 10:40. It is tomorrow morning. She looked at the 5 men behind him. Ease. They were all in leather, all in patches, all watching her, with the particular stillness of people who had been told about her and were now in the process of updating whatever they'd imagined. Ease, you brought friends, she said. I brought people who wanted to meet you, Dax said. Ease. There's a difference. He turned slightly. Emily Carter. Ease. Meet the people who spent the last 4 hours very interested in what I had to tell them. Ease. The man closest to Dax stepped forward. He was younger than Dax by about 10 years, compact and lean, with intelligent dark eyes, and the kind of jaw that looked like it had taken a punch or two and not minded. He's Marcus Webb, he said. Dax says you're the best mechanic in Denton County. Ease. Dax doesn't know the mechanics in Denton County well enough to say that, Emily said. Ease. Marcus Webb looked at Dax. Something passed between them. Ease. Then Marcus looked back at Emily, and the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was definitely something. Ease. He also said you'd say something like that, Marcus told her. Ease. She crossed her arms, not defensively. She stood the way her father had always stood, weight-balanced, nothing apologetic in it. Ease. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Dax didn't answer immediately. Ease. Instead, he looked past her into the garage. Ease. And she watched him take in the Triumph half-assembled on the center lift. Ease. The Indian finished and waiting in the corner. Ease. The tools on the wall in their precise order. Ease. The general organized industry of a place that was being worked rather than abandoned. Ease. He looked at it with the eyes of someone who understood what they were seeing. Ease. Your shop is still running, he said. My shop is always running, she said. Ease. Even with the letter, especially with the letter. She held his gaze. Ease. What is it you actually came here for, Dax? He was quiet for a moment. Ease. Then can we come inside? She made coffee for 7. Ease. She did it without comment or ceremony, which she later understood had said something to them, though she didn't think about it at the time. Ease. She was focused on the practical question of having 6 large men in leather standing in a garage that was also a working repair shop. Ease. And the answer to that question was to put coffee in their hands and establish that this was her space, and she ran it. Ease. Dax sat on the throne stool. The others distributed themselves around the garage with the unconscious spatial awareness of people accustomed to reading rooms, and nobody touched her tools or her bikes without asking, which she noted. Ease. Tell me what you know about Meridian, Dax said. Tell me what you know first, she said. Ease. You came to me. Dax accepted this without argument. Ease. He told her what he'd been investigating for the past 2 weeks, more detail than he'd given her at midnight, filling in the pieces he'd held back when he wasn't sure who she was. Ease. Meridian Property Solutions had been incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago with a registered agent that connected through 3 shell layers to a holding group based in Fort Worth. Ease. The man behind it, at least, the man whose fingerprints were on the actual decisions, even if his name wasn't anywhere in the official documentation, was a developer named Harlan Cross. Ease. Cross has been wanting to build in this corridor for 5 years, Dax said. Ease. Light industrial conversion. Turn the small business district into mixed-use development. Ease. High-end. The kind of thing that makes money for investors and makes neighborhoods unrecognizable to the people who grew up in them. He drank his coffee. Ease. The problem he kept running into was that the properties he needed weren't for sale. Ease. People didn't want to sell, so he stopped asking. Ease. And started lending, Emily said. And started lending, Dax confirmed. Ease. Set up Meridian to offer financing to businesses that were struggling, terms that looked reasonable on the surface. with provisions buried in the secondary clauses that gave Meridian significant leverage if payments or valuations shifted in specific ways. They used two attorneys who specialized in making predatory language look like standard commercial boilerplate. Emily thought about Gerald, her father's attorney, cheerfully handling the estate with the competence of someone doing the bare minimum. My father, she said. He signed with them in 2019. Because the garage was struggling and they offered him terms that looked viable, Dax said. Not gently, but honestly. Your father wasn't careless, Emily. He was a small business owner dealing with a cash problem and a predatory actor who was very good at looking legitimate. She had made a decision sometime in those early morning hours over her notes that she was not going to cry about this in front of anyone. She held to that decision now. How many businesses? We've confirmed 11 in 5 counties, Marcus said from across the garage. We think there are more that haven't connected the pattern yet because they don't know other people got the same letter. Emily turned to look at him. You've been working on this too. For 10 days, Marcus said, since Dax brought it to us. She looked at the group of them, 6 men who had ridden here at 10:40 in the morning on a weekday, and she thought about what that meant in practical terms. In terms of what they had chosen to spend their Tuesday doing. Why, she said. I'm not asking it wrong. I'm genuinely asking. This isn't your fight. The garage was quiet for a moment. Dax set his coffee down. The machine shop in Louisville, he said. That's a man named Frank Kowalski. He's been my brother's closest friend for 35 years. The body shop in Gainesville belonged to a woman who took in 3 of our members' kids during a stretch that was rough for their families. The diner on Elm and Denton, you know it? Rosie's, Emily said immediately. Of course I know it. Rosie Mendez has been feeding people who couldn't pay for 20 years, Dax said. She's got one of those letters too. He looked at Emily steadily. This isn't about us deciding to be heroes. It's about the fact that the people this man is targeting are the same people who have been part of this community for decades. And we know what it looks like when somebody decides those people are disposable. Emily was quiet for a moment. Rosie got a letter, she said. Same Friday. Same origin point. Emily thought about Rosie Mendez, who was 63 years old and had started the diner with her husband 30 years ago and had kept it going alone for the last 8 years since he died, and who put a plate in front of anyone who came through her door regardless of what was in their wallet. She thought about Frank Kowalski's machine shop, which she'd never been inside, but whose sign she had driven past 100 times. She thought about the body shop in Gainesville, which she didn't know by name, but could picture in the way you picture the furniture of a community always there. Part of the landscape is unremarked on until it isn't. What does he want my garage for specifically, she said. Marcus moved to stand beside Dax. Your property sits at the exact center of the corridor Cross needs for his development. The other acquisitions build around it, but without this lot, the whole project has a hole in the middle that kills the financing structure. He looked at her. You're not one of 11 targets, Emily. You're the target. The others create the corridor. Your property closes it. She absorbed this, so the 60-day letter, she said, is specifically timed, Dax said, to line up with the point at which the other properties will already be in default proceedings. If he has them and not you, his project stalls. He needs you resolved before the others become public. Emily sat down on the edge of the workbench. She didn't do it because her legs were unsteady, they weren't. She did it because she needed to think, and she thought better when she wasn't performing steadiness for an audience. The brake line, she said. On your bike. That was Cross. Or someone working for him, Dax said. I'd gotten close enough to the specific documentation on the Meridian filings that someone got nervous. The sabotage was a message. He paused. A message that got delivered to you instead, which is why I'm sitting here instead of being a statistic on Route 380. The garage was very quiet. I want to see what you've got, Emily said. The documentation, everything you've compiled. She looked at Dax. And I want to show you something too. She went to the desk drawer. She pulled out the Meridian letter. She put it on the workbench. And then she pulled out the notes she'd made from 4 in the morning until 6:14. Ease. 6 pages of her father's handwriting style printing she'd been told her entire life. He wrote exactly like him, laying out every detail she remembered about the original financing agreement, every conversation she'd had with Gerald. Ease. Every clause she could recall, and the specific questions she had written out in the final 2 pages about provisions that had seemed strange to her even at the time, but that Gerald had waved past. Ease. Dax picked up the notes. He read them in silence. He handed them to Marcus. Ease. Marcus read them in silence. Then Marcus looked up and found Emily's eyes, and the thing in his expression was not pity. Ease. It was not condescension. It was the specific look of someone who has just received information that changes the shape of what they thought they knew. Ease. This provision on page 3, Marcus said, tapping the notes. Ease. Section 4 You wrote a question mark next to it. It read wrong to me, Emily said. Gerald told me it was standard commercial language. Ease. But it read wrong. It reads wrong because it isn't standard, Marcus said. Ease. It's the mechanism. It allows Meridian to call the balloon early, before the 60-day window, if they can argue that the property's market value has dropped relative to an independent assessment they commission. He looked at her steadily. Ease. Which means they don't actually need the 60 days. Ease. If they commission their own appraisal and argue the value has dropped, they can move on a shorter timeline. Ease. The silence that followed this was different from the other silences. Ease. It had a specific texture. How short? Emily said. Ease. Depends on how fast they move the appraisal, Marcus said. Ease. Could be days. Emily looked at the letter. She looked at her notes. She looked at the cut break line in its labeled bag on the parts shelf. Then we don't have 60 days, she said. No, Dax said. Ease, we don't. She stood up from the workbench. Ease. She pulled the shop rag from her back pocket and she turned it over in her hands once. Ease. Not to clean anything. Ease. Just to have something to do with her hands while she thought. Ease. And then she put it back. Ease. What do you need from me? She said. Ease. What they needed, it turned out, was her records. Emily kept records the way her father had kept records, meticulously, chronologically. Ease. In a system that was old-fashioned enough to involve actual physical binders, but disciplined enough that she could find any work order from the past 6 years in under 4 minutes. Ease. She had timed herself once. Her father had kept records going back to 2001, and those were in the filing cabinet in the back room. Ease. And she had maintained them after he died, because throwing them away had felt like throwing away the proof that he'd existed and worked and been careful. Ease. She showed Marcus the binders. Ease. She showed him where the original financing documents were not with Gerald, but her own copies, which she had kept in a separate sleeve in the 2019 binder, because she had learned from her father that you always kept your own copies of everything. Ease. Marcus sat down at the desk with the binder and a legal pad, and he began working with the focus of someone who had done this before. Ease. Dax stood beside Emily in the center of the garage while Marcus worked. He's good at this, Dax said quietly. Marcus. Before he started writing, he spent 8 years as a paralegal. Ease. Emily looked at Marcus, bent over the desk, already 2 pages into notes of his own, pen moving with the controlled speed of someone who had trained their hand to keep up with their brain. He rides with you now, she said. For 15 years, Dax said. He made a choice about what kind of life he wanted. He paused. We all did. She was quiet for a moment. What Harlan Cross thinks about you, she said carefully. About all of you. He thinks that works in his favor. The optics. He thinks people see our patches and stop seeing us, Dax said. Yes. And does that? She stopped herself. Hurt? Dax looked at her sideways. I'm 62 years old, Emily. I've spent 40 years having people decide who I am before I open my mouth. At some point, you stop waiting for their opinion to be correct. He paused. But you're right that Cross is counting on it. He's counting on the fact that if this becomes public, nobody's going to take our side of the story seriously. He looked at her. Which is why you matter. She turned to look at him. You're not us, he said plainly. You're a 25-year-old woman whose father built something she's trying to save. Your records, your documentation, your testimony, that's the story that sticks. We can be the community standing beside you, but the story has to be yours. Emily thought about that. Ease. She thought about whether it bothered her being told that her value in this situation was partly because of what she looked like and how old she was and what it would mean, optics-wise, for Harlan Cross to have taken her family's garage. Ease. She turned the idea over carefully, the way she turned over a part she was about to install, checking for flaws. Ease, as long as the story is also true, she said finally. Ease. Which it is. He is trying to take my father's garage. Ease. The records are real. My testimony is real. She looked at Dax. Ease. I'm not a prop. No, Dax said. You're not. You're the person who opened her door at midnight when she didn't have to. He was quiet for a moment. Ease. We don't manufacture that. We just make sure people see it. Ease. Marcus worked for 3 hours. Ease. Emily went back to the Triumph because the carburetor wasn't going to rebuild itself and the customer was coming Thursday. And she wasn't going to let Harlan Cross cost her that job on top of everything else. Ease. The other 5 men drifted in and out of the garage with the easy comfort of people who understood working spaces. Ease. And one of them, a quiet man named Ray, who said almost nothing, but had the hands of someone who had done mechanical work, held a light for her when the carburetor reassembly required 3 hands and she only had 2. Ease. And he held it exactly where she needed it without being told twice. Ease. At 2 in the afternoon, Marcus came out of the back room with his legal pad and 14 pages of notes. Ease. He put them on the workbench. Okay, he said. Here's what we have. Ease. What they had was this. The original financing agreement contained 3 provisions that individually might pass legal scrutiny, but together constituted a coordinated mechanism for manufactured default. Ease. Marcus had identified the same 3-provision pattern in documents he'd obtained from 2 of the other Meridian targets. Ease. The pattern was identical, not similar. Identical, which meant it wasn't boilerplate. Ease. It was a template, a deliberately designed trap. Ease. If we can get the documents from the other businesses, ease, Marcus said, ease, all 11, ease, and show that template side by side, ease, that's not a civil complaint. Ease, that's a fraud pattern. You need a lawyer, Emily said. We have one, Dax said. In Dallas. She's been looking at this since last week. Emily said. Her name is Patricia Dunn, Marcus said. Ease. She spent 12 years as a federal prosecutor before she went private. Ease. She's handled RICO cases. She knows what a fraud pattern looks like, and she's been waiting for enough documentation to take to the right people. He paused. Ease. She's been waiting for the linchpin property. Everyone in the garage was looking at Emily. Ease. She understood what that meant. Me, she said. Your records are the cleanest, Marcus said. Ease. Your father was meticulous. The timeline is documented from the first contact through the signing through every payment made. Ease. You even have a note in the 2019 binder. He held up a page where your father wrote, and I am quoting directly, Gerald says 4 ba is standard. Ease. Something still reads wrong. Keep watching it. Your father flagged the exact provision. Ease in writing. In a contemporaneous record. Emily stood very still. Ease. Her father had known. He hadn't known what it was, hadn't understood the mechanism, but he had known something was wrong and he had written it down because that was the kind of man he was. Ease. He had written it down and put it in a binder, and she had maintained the binder, and now it was sitting on a desk in the garage he'd built, and it was going to be the thing that undid Harlan Cross. Ease. He knew, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. He knew something, Dax said. Not cruelly. Honestly. Ease. He just didn't have all of it. She took a breath. Ease. She let it out. She reached for the legal pad, and she looked at the 14 pages Marcus had written, and she understood most of it immediately and asked 2 questions about the parts she didn't. Ease. And Marcus answered both questions without condescension, which she noted and appreciated. Ease. Patricia Dunn needs to see all of this, she said. Ease. She can be here tomorrow, Dax said. Emily looked up. Ease. You already called her. I called her at 8 this morning, Dax said. Ease. I told her we might have what she needed. She said she'd clear her afternoon tomorrow if we did. Ease. Emily set the legal pad down. Ease. She looked at the garage around her, the Triumph she was, halfway through. Ease. The morning's work. Ease. The binders in the back room. Ease. The sign above the door in her father's handwriting. Ease. Tomorrow afternoon, she said. If that works for you, Dax said. Ease. It works, she said. She picked up her wrench. The Triumph won't rebuild itself. Ease. There was a pause. Then Marcus said with the same quality of not quite a smile he'd had earlier. You want any help? She looked at him, at his hands. You know carburetors, she said. He's 1971 Triumph TR6, he said. Had one for 4 years. She handed him a secondary tool. Then yes, she said. I want help. They worked until 5. At some point, she couldn't have said exactly when the garage had shifted from feeling like an invaded space to feeling like a full one, and the difference between those two things was significant. The other men came and went. Someone produced sandwiches from somewhere around 1:30. Ray held the light again when she needed it. Dax sat on the throne stool and made 2 phone calls she didn't ask about and answered 3 that came in. And once she heard him say, very quietly but with a finality that closed the subject, no, not that way. We do this right. She didn't ask what that had been about. She didn't need to. When the Triumph was fully reassembled and she ran it up on the lift and fired it, and the engine came alive clean, and even Marcus let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and an exhale, and she felt the satisfaction of it move through her, the way it always did when a sick machine found its voice again, pure and uncomplicated and hers. She brought it down off the lift and turned to find Dax watching her. You're good, he said, simply. Not a compliment offered to make her feel better. An assessment. I know, she said. Simply, not error. The same honest register. He nodded once. Patricia Dunn tomorrow at 2, he said. We'll be here. How many of you? She said. He considered. 6, maybe 8. She looked at him. This garage has seen worse crowds, she said. My dad used to do community cookouts out of this lot every July 4th. Fit 60 people in here once. Something crossed Dax Walker's face that was the closest she had yet seen to unguarded, a brief, undefended expression of a man encountering something unexpectedly good in the world. July 4th cookouts, he said. 40 years he did it, she said. Never missed one. Dax was quiet for a moment. We won't miss tomorrow, he said. He held out as she shook it, as firm as his, no performance in it. And then the men began moving toward their bikes, and she stood in her garage doorway and watched them go. 6 Harleys pulled onto the road, and she listened to their engines until the sound was gone. She went back inside. She sat at the desk. She opened the 2019 binder to the page Marcus had quoted. There was her father's handwriting, the same careful block letters that were on the sign above the door. The same letters she'd been told her whole life she replicated when she printed anything. Gerald says 4 Bob is standard. Something still reads wrong. Keep watching it. She put her hand flat on the page. She kept it there for a moment. Then she closed the binder carefully and put it back in its place. Tomorrow Patricia Dunn was coming. Tomorrow something was going to begin that was bigger than a brake line or a certified letter or a 60-day window. Emily Carter turned off the desk lamp. Walked back out to the garage. Picked up her tools. And got back to work. Patricia Dunn arrived at 1:53 in the afternoon. Emily knew who she was before she got off the motorcycle, and she was on a motorcycle which Emily had not expected. A clean silver BMW R125 EGs, ridden with the upright confidence of someone who had been doing it a long time, because Dax stepped forward when she pulled in, and the way he moved toward her was different from the way he moved toward anyone else. Not deference exactly. More like the recognition between 2 people who have been through something difficult together and come out knowing exactly what the other is worth. Patricia Dunn was 51 years old. Medium height. Natural gray threaded through dark hair. She wore short and practical. And she had the kind of face that had probably been called intense her whole life by people who meant it as a gentle criticism and hadn't understood they were paying her a compliment. She pulled off her helmet, tucked it under her arm, and looked at the garage sign the way people looked at things when they were already thinking 3 steps past the immediate moment. Then she looked at Emily. You're Carter's daughter, she said. Not a question. Emily, she said, you want coffee before we start? Patricia Dunn smiled at that, a fast, real smile. Nothing performed about it. I want to see the binders first, she said. Coffee. Emily liked her immediately. 8 bikers were in the garage. Patricia sat up at the desk in the back room with the binders. Her laptop. And a legal pad. And she worked with the focused intensity of someone who had spent a career reading documents the way Emily read engines, listening for the sound that wasn't right, the vibration that didn't match. The thing that wanted to be hidden underneath, the thing that was visible. Emily stayed close. Answering questions when Patricia asked them. Finding specific documents when Patricia needed them. And staying out of the way when Patricia needed to think. At 2:47, Patricia stopped writing. She put her pen down. She sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the specific way of someone absorbing something important. Emily waited. Emily, Patricia said, how well do you remember the conversation with Gerald when your father signed the original agreement? Clearly, Emily said. I was there. Dad wanted me there for everything after Mom left. Said 2 sets of ears were better than 1. Patricia turned to look at her. What did Gerald say about Section 4B? He said it was standard commercial language, Emily said. He said it was a routine valuation provision, common in commercial real estate financing, nothing to worry about. Did your father push back? He asked Gerald twice, Emily said. Gerald used the word standard, both times. Dad wrote it in the binder, she paused. What Gerald didn't say was that the valuation wasn't independent. Meridian commissions it, which means Meridian controls when and how the valuation happens. Which means the trigger for early call is entirely within their control. Patricia looked at her steadily. You figured that out from the notes you made. I figured it out at 4 in the morning after Dax told me what Meridian was, Emily said. Gerald figured it out too. He had to have. She stopped. She took a breath. He had to have known what that provision meant. The garage was very quiet. Patricia picked up her pen. Gerald's full name. Gerald Simmons. He's in Denton. Same office for 20 years. Patricia wrote it down. She wrote something else beneath it. She drew a line under both entries and moved on, and Emily watched her do it and understood that Gerald had just become a thread in a larger pattern Patricia was already pulling. Dax appeared in the doorway of the back room. He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at him. Something moved between them in the way of people who have had 100 conversations without words. How bad, he said. Bad enough to be useful, Patricia said. Give me 30 more minutes. The 30 minutes became an hour. At 4:15, Patricia came out of the back room with her legal pad and her laptop, and she set them on the workbench, and she looked at the 8 men. And Emily gathered in the garage, and she said, without preamble, without warm-up, here's what we have, and here's what we need. What they had was a documented fraud pattern. The 3 provisions Marcus had identified were present in identical language in the Meridian agreements for 4 of the 11 businesses, the 4 whose documents they currently held. The template matched precisely enough that Patricia was prepared to argue it was not coincidence or standard form language, but a deliberately engineered mechanism for manufactured default. Gerald Simmons, as the attorney who had represented Emily's father in the transaction, had an obligation to identify predatory provisions in his client's interest. The evidence suggested he had failed that obligation, and Patricia's phrase for the specific natures of that failure was quiet and careful and landed in the garage like a stone in still water. The question is whether Gerald's failure was negligent or cooperative. The room was very quiet after that. Cooperative, Dax said. Not a question. It's a question, not a conclusion, Patricia said. But it's a question that needs answering, and the answer changes the shape of this significantly. She looked at Emily. If Gerald was cooperating with Meridian, if he was steering clients toward a trap he knew was a trap, then this isn't just a civil fraud case. It's a conspiracy, and that gets us into territory where federal jurisdiction becomes relevant. Emily thought about Gerald, his cheerful competence, his casual dismissal of her father's question, the way he had said standard twice, easily, like a man who had said it many times before and found that it always worked. He had other clients, Emily said slowly, in the years around 2019. Other small businesses. That's what I need, Patricia said immediately. Names. Anyone you know of who used Gerald Simmons around that period who also had financing from a source that turned out to be connected to Meridian or Cross. Because if this is a pattern, if Gerald was a pipeline feeding Cross's targets. Frank Kowalski, Dax said from across the garage. Everyone looked at him. Frank's machine shop, Dax said. Frank used Gerald Simmons. I know because Frank told me he used the same attorney as a business acquaintance he trusted. He paused. The acquaintance was Walter Carter. Emily's throat tightened. Her father had recommended Gerald, had trusted Gerald enough to recommend him. And Gerald had pointed Frank Kowalski toward the same trap he'd helped set for Walter Carter. There are more, Dax said. I can make calls. Make the calls, Patricia said. While Dax made calls, Patricia walked Emily through what came next and what it would cost. Not money. Emily had offered what she had, and Patricia had told her with brisk kindness that the fee arrangement was not Emily's immediate concern. What it would cost was different. It would cost Emily her privacy, temporarily. It would cost her time. It would potentially cost her the 60-day window entirely if Cross moved the appraisal up, if he activated Section 4BA before they could get an injunction in place. Emily could find herself in an active default proceeding while the larger case was still being assembled. And if that happens, Emily said, then we fight the default proceeding and the fraud case simultaneously, Patricia said. It's harder. It's not impossible, she looked at Emily directly. But I want you to understand that going forward means the situation gets worse before it gets better. That's almost always true in these cases. The question is whether you can stand in the worst part long enough to reach the better part. Emily thought about her father's handwriting on the sign above the door. She thought about the note in the 2019 binder. Something still reads wrong. Keep watching it. And the fact that he had been right. And the fact that he had documented being right. And the fact that she had kept the documentation. Tell me what I need to do, she said. At 5:30, Dax's phone rang. He listened for 40 seconds without speaking. His expression didn't change in any dramatic way. It was more that it became more still. The specific stillness of a man receiving information that confirms something he'd been afraid to fully believe. He said, you're certain, and listen for another 10 seconds. He said, don't move anything. Don't talk to anyone. I'll call you back. He ended the call. He looked at Emily. He looked at Patricia. Frank Kowalski, he said. He got a visit today. Two men from Meridian. They came to his shop in person and told him that they were accelerating the timeline on his agreement. They showed him paperwork, an independent appraisal dated yesterday, showing the machine shop's property value had decreased 15%. Patricia's jaw tightened. Yesterday. Commissioned and completed in a single day, Dax said. Which is not how independent appraisals work. No, Patricia said. It isn't. She was already opening her laptop. It's also not how they work if they're genuinely independent, which this one clearly isn't. An appraisal commissioned and delivered in 24 hours by a firm that Meridian uses is not independent. It's a prop. Her fingers were moving. Frank has the paperwork they showed him? He photographed every page before they left, Dax said. He had the presence of mind. Smart man, Patricia said. 30-year machinist, Dax said. He's been reading documents people hand him his whole career. He knows when something's being done to him. Tell him to send me the photographs, Patricia said. Everyone, she looked up from the laptop. And tell him not to sign anything. Not one page, not a receipt, nothing. Dax was already on the phone. Emily stood beside Patricia and looked at the laptop screen where Patricia had pulled up a legal research database and was moving through it with the speed of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. What does this mean? Emily said quietly. Them moving on Frank today. Patricia glanced at her sideways. It means Cross knows we're looking, she said. Or suspects it. He's accelerating the timeline across the board, trying to lock in the default proceedings before we can get organized. She paused. It also means he doesn't know about your father's binder. He doesn't know about the brake line. If he did, he'd be moving differently. She kept typing. He thinks he's ahead of us. That's an advantage we need to use in the next 48 hours. Emily felt something cold move through her, not fear exactly, but the recognition of fear's near neighbor, the understanding of what was actually at stake and how fast it was moving. Ease. Tell me what to do in the next 48 hours, she said. Ease. Keep the garage open, Patricia said immediately. Ease. Keep working. Don't change your schedule. Don't contact Meridian. Don't call Gerald. Ease. Behave exactly as you have been behaving, which is like a woman who has a business to run and is running it. She glanced at Emily. Ease. Can you do that? I have a Sportster with an electrical fault I haven't finished diagnosing, Emily said. Ease. And 2 other jobs coming in Thursday. Then do that, Patricia said. Ease. That's your job. Let me do mine. Ease. The photograph pages from Frank's appraisal arrived at 5:58. Ease. Patricia opened them on her laptop. She spent 4 minutes looking at them without speaking, scrolling slowly, and the quality of her silence was the kind that has a temperature to it. Ease. When she finally spoke, her voice was level in the way that people's voices are level when they are making a deliberate choice not to let the register of what they're feeling alter their words. Ease. The appraisal firm is Valley Assessment Services, she said. Ease. Incorporated in Texas 14 months ago. Ease. Marcus, who had moved to stand beside the laptop, said, Ease. 14 months. Ease. Same month as Meridian Property Solutions, Patricia said. Ease. Different incorporation state, same registered agent. Ease. The garage went completely silent. They created both entities, Marcus said. Ease. At the same time, Patricia said. Meridian to hold the predatory agreements. Ease. Valley Assessment to provide the manufactured appraisals that trigger the accelerated defaults. She closed the laptop with a soft, decisive click. Ease. This is not a real estate developer who crossed some ethical lines. Ease. This is a coordinated criminal enterprise. These documents, she put her hand on the laptop, combined with Emily's binder, combined with the brake line, combined with the testimony of the other business owners, this is enough. Is enough for what? Emily said. Patricia looked at her. Is enough to go to the FBI. Nobody spoke for a moment. The FBI, Dax said. This crosses state lines, Patricia said. Ease. The incorporation structures, the financing arrangements, multiple jurisdictions are involved. Ease. This is federal territory. She looked at Dax. I have a contact at the Dallas field office. Ease. A former colleague. I've been sitting on this case, waiting for the piece that made it federal. She paused. Ease. Emily's binder is that piece. The Valley Assessment connection is confirmation. She stood up from the workbench. Ease. I'm going to make a call. She stepped out of the garage. Ease. The 8 men and Emily stood in the space she'd left. Ease, who had said almost nothing in 2 days, said, the FBI. Ease. Yes, Dax said. Cross won't know that's coming, Ray said. Ease. No, Dax said, looked at Emily. Your dad's binder, he said. Ease. Saved everybody. Emily didn't answer right away. Ease. She was thinking about her father, about a man who wrote notes to himself in binders because he was careful, because he'd learned that careful mattered. Because the work you did alone at midnight, when nobody was watching, was the work that made you. Ease. He had flagged Section 4 and tucked the note into the 2019 binder and died 14 months later without ever knowing what the note meant. Ease. Yes, she said finally. It did. Ease. Patricia was outside for 11 minutes. When she came back in, she said, tomorrow morning, it's 10 o'clock, Dallas field office. Ease. They want Emily. Ease. They want the binder. Ease. They want the brake line. Ease. And they want every document Marcus compiled. Ease. She looked around the room. Ease. They also want a statement from whoever found the brake line. Ease. That's Emily, Dax said. I know, Patricia said. Ease. She looked at Emily. Are you ready to do this? I was ready at 4 a.m. 2 days ago, Emily said. Ease. Yes, good. Patricia picked up her helmet from the workbench where she'd set it when she arrived. Ease, I'll meet you there at 9:45. We go in together. She paused. Ease. One more thing. The FBI contact told me something when I outlined the case. She looked at Emily. Ease. He said the Valley Assessment connection, the simultaneous incorporation, that's not something that comes up in routine investigation. Ease. He asked how we found it. Marcus found it, Emily said. Ease. Looking at the appraisal documents Frank sent, Patricia looked at Marcus. Ease. How did you know to look at the incorporation date? Ease. Marcus thought for a moment. Because when a company appears exactly when it's needed and disappears when the job is done, It usually didn't appear by accident, he said. I've seen that structure before. Meridian needed a tool it could control. It built the tool at the same time it built itself. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. You were a paralegal. For 8 years, Marcus said. I'm going to need a full statement from you too, she said. I know, Marcus said. Emily closed the garage at 8 that night. She had diagnosed the Sportster's electrical fault, a corroded ground connection behind the battery. The kind of gremlin that could hide for months and express itself as seemingly random failures before someone finally ran down the full circuit and found it crouching there in the obvious place. She had fixed it. She had done this while Patricia was on her phone with the FBI, and Marcus was preparing his statement, and Dax was coordinating with Frank Kowalski and several other business owners who were now in the network of people who knew what was happening. She did it because it was her job, and the bike needed it, and she was still a mechanic, regardless of what else she was becoming tonight. At 7:15, her phone rang, unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. Then she did, Miss Carter. The voice was male, smooth, the kind of smooth that had been practiced. My name is Richard Phelps. I'm calling on behalf of Meridian Property Solutions. We understand you may have received some information recently that's caused you concern about your financing agreement, and we'd like to... Mr. Phelps, Emily said. Her voice was completely steady. I'd like you to direct any future communications about my financing agreement to my attorney. A pause. Brief, but there, of course. Could I get her name? Patricia Dunn, Emily said. Dallas, she's easy to find. Another pause. Longer this time. We'll be in touch, Phelps said. I'm sure you will, Emily said and ended the call. She stood for a moment holding the phone. Then she put it in her pocket and went back to work. She was finishing the ground connection on the Sportster when Dax appeared beside her. You got a call, he said. It wasn't a question. Phelps, she said. He's smooth-voiced. Checking whether I had a lawyer. Now they know. Now they know, she said. I gave them Patricia's name. She looked at Dax. They're going to move faster now. They know we have counsel. Dax said. How much faster? Maybe tonight, he said. Maybe tomorrow before 10. He looked at her steadily. Which is why 2 of us are staying. She looked up from the bike. Marcus and Ray, he said, in the lot. Not inside. You don't need babysitting. And I'm not saying you do. But they'll be outside tonight. And if a van with Meridian's logo or anyone else's logo comes down this road at 2 in the morning, you'll have people who know what to do with that. Emily looked at him. She thought about saying she didn't need it. She thought about the independence of that statement and the genuine truth of it, and also the other truth. The one that sat beside it without contradiction, that accepting help from people who were offering it freely was not weakness. Her father had known that. His garage had survived 3 lean years in the early 2000s because the community had kept its cars and bikes coming to him, even when they could have gone cheaper elsewhere. He had accepted that help and remembered it for the rest of his life and paid it forward in every cookout, every discounted repair, every time he'd put a wrench to something for someone who couldn't quite make the full rate. Thank you, Emily said. Don't thank me, Dax said. You fixed my bike. You would have thanked me with a check, she said. This is different. Maybe, he said. Or maybe people like us, people who do the work and keep the records and fix the things that need fixing. Maybe we were always going to end up standing in the same place when something came after what we built. And he looked at the sign above the door, her father's letters in dark green on white. Walter Carter spent 22 years building something worth protecting. It turns out there were people who understood that even when he was gone. Emily looked at the sign. She had not cried about any of this. Not when she read the letter. Not when she found the brake line. Not when Patricia said the word cooperative about Gerald. Not when she heard that her father had written his note of doubt in 2019 and filed it in a binder and gone on building his life around a trap he couldn't see the whole shape of. She did not cry now either, but she put her hand against the wall below the sign for just a moment, the way you put your hand on something to confirm it's still there. It was there. The garage was still there. And tomorrow at 10 in the morning, ease. Emily Carter was going to walk into the Dallas FBI field office with her father's binder under her arm, ease. And she was going to tell the truth about everything she knew, ease. And the truth was documented, ease. And the documentation was meticulous, and the man who had tried to build a crime around a dead man's careful notes had made a serious miscalculation about what kind of woman that dead man had raised. Ease. Emily went back to the Sportster. She had a ground connection to finish. Ease. And she was going to finish it right. Marcus knocked on the garage door at 6:45 the next morning. Ease. Emily was already up. Ease. She had slept 4 hours. Ease. Which was becoming her standard. Ease. And she had made coffee and gone through the binder one more time, not because she needed to. Ease. She had the contents memorized by now. Ease. But because there was something steadying about handling it, about feeling the physical weight of her father's careful work in her hands. Ease. When she heard the knock, she set the binder down and opened the door. Ease. And Marcus was standing there with 2 cups from a drive-thru she hadn't heard him leave to find. Ease. And Ray was visible in the lot behind him. Ease. Leaning against his bike. Ease. Looking like a man who had spent a comfortable night outside and had no complaints about it. Ease. You didn't sleep, Marcus said. Not an accusation. Ease. An observation, she said. I'm fine. She took the coffee. Ease. You were out there all night. Ray and I traded off, Marcus said. 3 on 3 off. Nothing came down the road. He paused. Ease. Phelps didn't send anyone. Either they decided it wasn't worth the risk, Emily said, or they're waiting to see what we do first. Ease. Or both, Marcus said. You ready for today? Emily looked at him. Ease. She was wearing clean jeans. Ease. Her least damaged work shirt. Ease. And her father's old leather jacket, the brown one, with the worn elbows that she'd taken from his closet the week after the funeral, and had worn exactly twice since. Ease. Both times when she needed something from him that she couldn't articulate. Ease. She looked. Ease. She knew. Ease like exactly what she was. Ease. A mechanic's daughter going to the FBI to tell the truth. Ease. Ready, she said. Patricia was at the Dallas field office at 9:42, standing outside with a briefcase and the expression of someone who had been to this building before and knew exactly how it worked. Ease. She looked at Emily's jacket. Ease. Looked at the binder tucked under Emily's arm. Ease. Looked at Dax and Marcus and Ray, who had ridden down with her. Ease. And she said, Ease. The 3 of you wait outside. Ease. This goes smoother without an audience. Dax nodded once. Ease. We'll be here. Patricia looked at Emily. Ready? Ease. People keep asking me that, Emily said. Because you keep looking like the answer is yes, Patricia said, which is the correct answer. She pushed open the door. Ease. Come on. The agent assigned to them was named Carver. Ease. Special Agent Daniel Carver. Ease. Mid-40s. Ease. Compact build. Ease. The kind of face that had been professionally expressionless for so long that it had become his natural resting state. Ease. He shook Emily's hand with the efficiency of a man who shook many hands and remembered none of them. And then he looked at the binder she set on the conference table, and something in his efficiency briefly shifted. Ease. That's the original, he said. Original and complete, Patricia said. Ease. Chain of custody documentation is in the front sleeve. Ease. Emily has maintained these records since her father's death 14 months ago. Ease. The 2019 entries are entirely in Walter Carter's hand. Ease. Carver pulled the binder toward him. He opened it to the front. Ease. He began reading, with the stillness of someone trained to extract information from documents while giving nothing away about what the information was doing to him. Ease. Emily sat across the table and watched him read and said nothing, which was what Patricia had told her to do. And which was easy because Emily had grown up in a garage where you didn't talk while someone was concentrating on something that mattered. Ease. Carver stopped at a page. He went back. He read something twice. Ease. He looked up at Emily. Bye, he said. Your father flagged this. Ease. 14 months before I got the letter, Emily said. Ease. He asked Gerald Simmons about it twice. Gerald called it standard commercial language both times. Ease. You were present for those conversations. Both of them, Emily said. Ease. I can tell you exactly what Gerald said, the words he used, the order he said them in. Ease. I've got a good memory for what people say when they're talking about my father's garage. Ease. Carver held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Patricia. The brake line. Patricia produced the labeled evidence bag from her briefcase. Ease. Carver leaned forward and looked at it without touching it, the way you look at something you want to handle carefully. Ease. The mechanic who identified the cut is sitting across from you, Patricia said. Ease. Emily found it during a routine post-crash inspection. Ease. The work order is in the binder, dated, timed, signed. Ease. With the specific notation she made when she discovered the damage. Ease. She paused. Ease. Emily is the one who preserved it. Carver looked at Emily with the first real expression she'd seen from him, not warmth exactly, but the specific alertness of a person recalibrating. Ease. You knew what you were looking at, he said. I've been reading brake systems since I was 14, Emily said. Ease. That cut was deliberate. The angle, the depth, the placement, whoever did it, understood exactly what they were doing. Ease. They wanted it to fail at speed, not in the parking lot. Ease. Carver wrote something down. Then Emily told him about the phone call. Ease. Richard Phelps, the smooth voice, the question about whether she had counsel. Ease. She told him the exact words she'd used in response and the exact pauses that had followed. Ease. Carver wrote everything down and his face remained professionally neutral, and she had the sense, watching him, that the pauses in the Phelps call had told him something specific about where Cross's operation currently understood itself to be. Ease. Phelps called after Patricia had been retained, Carver said. Ease. After Marcus Webb identified the Valley Assessment connection. Ease. Within 3 hours of it, Patricia said. Carver set his pen down. Ease. He looked at the binder. He looked at the evidence bag. Ease. He looked at the 31 pages of compiled documentation Marcus had prepared, which Patricia had also included in the briefcase. He's counselor, he said. Give me 10 minutes. He left the room. Ease. Emily looked at Patricia. That's good, Patricia said quietly. Ease. When they leave to make a call, it means they found what they needed and they're calling someone who needs to know. Ease. How do you know he's making a call and not just stepping out? Emily said. Ease. Because he took the binder with him, Patricia said. Ease. Emily looked at the table. The binder was gone. She hadn't seen him pick it up. He's good, she said. He's very good, Patricia said. Ease. Which is what we needed. Carver came back in 14 minutes. Ease. He set the binder on the table. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table in the way of someone about to say something they want anchored. Ease. Miss Carter, he said. What I'm about to tell you is preliminary and subject to change, but I want you to understand the current position. Ease. The Valley Assessment Incorporation connection. Marcus Webb identified we've been aware of a related entity structure for approximately 6 weeks in connection with a separate investigation in another district. Ease. What you've brought us today connects those structures in a way that completes a link we were missing. He paused. Ease. You didn't just bring us your case. You brought us the piece of a larger case that we didn't have. Emily sat very still. How much larger? Patricia said. Significantly, Carver said. I can't give you specifics yet. Ease. What I can tell you is that we are going to move on this, and we are going to move quickly. And the first thing I need is an emergency motion in federal court. He looked at Patricia. Ease. Can you have an emergency injunction application ready by end of business today? I need the default proceedings against all 11 businesses halted while we work. Ease. I can have it ready by 3, Patricia said. Do it, Carver said. Ease. He looked at Emily. Your garage is not closing. I want to be clear about that. Ease. Whatever happens in the next 72 hours, that property is not changing hands. Ease. Emily looked at him. My father built it, she said. Ease. That was never negotiable. Carver looked at her for a moment. Ease. I understand, he said, and the professional neutrality in his voice had shifted just enough that she believed he did. Ease. They were outside by 11:30. Dax, Marcus, Ease, and Ray were where they'd been left. Ease, which Emily had not doubted for a single second. Ease. She walked out into the late morning air with Patricia beside her, and she told them in 4 sentences what Carver had said. Ease. And she watched Dax absorb the information with the same quality of stillness he'd had when she showed him the brake line, the stillness of a man receiving a confirmation he'd needed, but hadn't let himself fully count on. A larger case, Dax said. Across districts, Emily said. Ease. Cross wasn't only doing this here. Carver connected our structure to something they were already investigating. Ease. Marcus let out a breath. He built a machine. Marcus said. Ease. Meridian, Valley Assessment, Gerald, and whatever other attorneys were feeding him targets. Ease. He built the whole thing and ran it in multiple places. Ease. And got comfortable, Emily said. Comfortable enough to try to kill someone on Route 380 when he got too close. Ease. Dax looked at her. In his eyes was something she hadn't seen there before. Not quite relief, not quite satisfaction. Ease. But the thing that lives between them when a person has spent a long time standing in the right place for the right reason, and the world has finally confirmed that it was the right place. Patricia, he said. The injunction. I need to get back to Dallas, Patricia said, already moving toward the BMW. Please, I'll have it filed by 3. Carver will have it on a judge's desk by 4. She stopped and looked at Emily. Please go home. Open your garage. Fix something. She almost smiled. Please, you'll feel better. I already feel better, Emily said. Please. Patricia looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who believes what they're hearing and is glad of it. Please. Then she put her helmet on and rode. Please. She opened the garage at noon. Please. The Sportster's owner came to pick it up at 1. Please. And Emily walked him through what she'd found, the corroded ground. Please. The circuit path. Please. Exactly what had been causing the intermittent failures he'd been chasing for 4 months. And he listened with the attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand his machine. And he paid the invoice without comment. Please. And he shook her hand before he left, and the handshake was the specific kind that means something beyond a transaction. Please. She didn't know whether he'd heard anything about what was happening, and she didn't ask, and it didn't matter. Please. He had a bike that worked now. She had done her job. At 2:15, her phone rang. Patricia. Injunction filed. Please. Carver got it to the judge at 1:50. We're waiting on the signature, but the clerk told me informally that it's not a question of whether, just when. A pause. Please. Harlan Cross's attorney called my office 11 minutes after the filing appeared in the federal system. Please. What did they want? Emily said. They wanted to discuss a resolution, Patricia said. Please. Which is what people say when they want to negotiate their way out of a corner. Please. What did you say? I said that the resolution would be determined by the federal government and not by any negotiation with me, and that my client's property was not a bargaining chip in that discussion. Another pause. Please. Cross's attorney was not happy. Good, Emily said. Please. Also, Patricia said. Carver called. The injunction covers all 11 businesses. Please. Every default proceeding is halted as of this filing. Please. Frank Kowalski. Please. Rosie Mendez. Please. The body shop in Gainesville. Please. All of them. Please. Her voice shifted slightly into a register that was still professional but had something human moving through it. Please. None of them are losing their businesses today. Emily was standing at the workbench. Please. She had her hand flat on the surface of it, the same way she'd put her hand on the wall below the sign the night before. Ease. The wood of the workbench was worn smooth in places by 22 years of the same gesture, her father's hand setting things down on it, working on it, leaning on it when he needed to think. Patricia, she said. Thank you. Do good work, Patricia said. That's all I ask of the people I represent. A brief pause. Your father did. You do too. She ended the call. Ease. Emily stood at the workbench for a moment. Then she heard motorcycles. Ease. Not 6 this time. She walked to the garage door and looked out, and what she saw stopped her where she stood. Ease. There were motorcycles coming down the road. Ease. She counted without meaning to. Ease the way she always counted engines. Ease. But the count kept going past what she expected, past 10. Ease. Past 20. Ease. Past 30, and they were turning into her lot in a steady stream. Ease. Parking in rows. Ease. And the riders were dismounting and standing, and more were still coming, and she gripped the doorframe, and she watched, and she kept counting, and when she stopped counting, she had reached 134. Ease. 134 Harleys in her father's parking lot. Ease. 134 members of the Hells Angels standing in the Texas afternoon sun. Ease. And Dax Walker walking toward her from the front of all of them. Ease. She had not cried through any of this. Ease. She had not cried at the letter. Ease. Or the brake line. Ease. Or Gerald's name said in Patricia's careful voice. Ease. Or her father's note in the binder. Ease. Or Carver telling her the garage was not closing. Ease. She had held every piece of it with steady hands and a clear head, and the deliberate choice not to break in front of anyone, because breaking in front of people was not something her father had ever done, and it was not something she did either. She came extremely close to breaking right now. She held it. But it was close. Dak stopped in front of her. He looked at her face, whatever was visible on it, and his own face did something complicated and quiet. I made some calls last night, he said, after you went to sleep. How many calls, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. Enough, he said. People wanted to know. About your father. About the garage. About the midnight repair that didn't have to happen. He looked at her. About a 25-year-old woman who opened her door when she didn't have to and did the right thing when nobody was watching. Emily looked at the lot full of motorcycles. They're not here to threaten anyone, Dak said. No one's going to do anything. We're just going to stand here. In your father's parking lot, where everyone can see us. So that when Cross looks at the situation right now, what he sees is that you are not alone. He paused. He has been counting on you being alone. He built his whole plan around every target being isolated, not knowing about each other, facing him one at a time. His voice was quiet and very direct. We're showing him he miscalculated. Emily looked at the 134 men and the 134 machines filling the lot her father had paved himself 22 years ago on a piece of land no one else had wanted. He'll see this, she said. He'll hear about it in the next 20 minutes, Dak said. People take photographs. Word travels. He looked at her. Is this all right? She looked at him. She thought about what he'd said to her 2 days ago. The story has to be yours. And she thought about the fact that this was true, and this was also hers, and there was no contradiction between those two things. She had fixed the bike. She had kept the binder. She had gone to the FBI with her father's documentation and told the truth without embellishment. And now 134 people had chosen to stand in her parking lot because they had decided she was worth standing beside. Her father had done July 4th cookouts for 40 years and fed 60 people in this lot and never once thought he was doing something remarkable. He had just thought he was being a neighbor. This was the same thing, just larger. It's all right, she said. Do you want coffee? Dax looked at her for a moment with the same expression she'd seen on him in the hours before dawn when she'd handed him a mug, and he'd understood that she was going to treat him like a person regardless of what he was wearing. For 134 people, he said. I have a big pot, she said. Something broke open in Dax Walker's face, not dramatically, not in a way that would have been visible to anyone more than 3 feet away. But Emily was 3 feet away, and she saw at the guard that a 62-year-old man carries after 40 years of the world deciding who he is before he opens his mouth, dropping for just a moment. And underneath it was something that had probably been there the whole time, something that looked like the face of a man who had spent a long career protecting things he loved and had not always been thanked for it. Yeah, he said. Okay. She turned back into the garage to put the pot on. And behind her the lot was full of the sound of 134 engines cooling in the afternoon air. And her father's sign was above the door in its dark green letters. And the binder was on the desk in the back room, and the brake line was in its labeled bag on the parts shelf. And somewhere across the county, Harlan Cross was getting a phone call or a photograph or a piece of information that was going to make him understand that the woman he had tried to make invisible had turned out to be the most visible person in Denton County today. Cross's attorney called Patricia again at 4:30. This time the conversation lasted 8 minutes. Patricia called Emily immediately afterward. He's trying to withdraw the default proceedings, Patricia said. Cross is attempting to settle the outstanding agreements at face value and walk away from all 11 properties. Emily had the coffee pot in her hand. Can he do that? He can attempt it, Patricia said. It doesn't resolve the federal investigation. Settling the civil agreements doesn't make the fraud or the conspiracy disappear. Carver's investigation continues regardless of what Cross tries to offer the individual business owners. She paused. But it tells us something. He's scared, Emily said. He's terrified, Patricia said. The photograph of your parking lot is apparently on 3 different local news sites. He's 134 motorcycles outside a small garage in Denton, Texas, tends to generate some coverage. A pause. A reporter from the Star-Telegram called my office 20 minutes ago. Emily set the coffee pot down. What did you tell them? She said. That my client would be available for a brief statement tomorrow morning, Patricia said. Outside Carter Cycles. At 9 a.m., another pause. If that's all right with you. Emily looked around the garage. At the tools on the wall. At the Indian in the corner, its owner coming to collect it tomorrow. At the Triumph, running clean now. Picked up that morning. At the lot outside, still full of motorcycles, and the people who had chosen to ride them here. At the sign above the door. 9 a.m., Emily said. That's fine. At 6 o'clock, people started leaving. Not all at once, gradually, in small groups, the way people leave a place they've been comfortable. They shook her hand, some of them. A few said things. Most just nodded, the way her father's customers used to nod when they picked up a bike that had been fixed. Right, a nod that means more than words because it doesn't need them. A man named Hector, who had not spoken to her until this moment, stopped beside the garage door on his way out. He was close to 70, built like he'd spent the first half of his life doing hard physical labor, and he had the specific posture of a man who had decided long ago exactly how much of the world's opinion he was going to carry. My grandfather ran a small shop in San Antonio, he said. Hardware for 30 years. He paused. Somebody tried to take it from him when I was 16. His community showed up. It works, he said. It always works when enough people show up. Emily looked at him. What happened to his shop? He ran it for another 18 years, Hector said. He's retired at 81. Sold it to a man from his church. He paused. His shop's still there. Emily nodded. Hector nodded. He walked to his bike. By 7:30, the lot was quiet. A half dozen bikes remained. Dax, Marcus, Ray, and 3 others who had, without announcement or discussion, simply not left. Emily didn't ask them why. She had stopped being surprised by the way these men made decisions. She went to the desk in the back room. She opened the 2019 binder. She turned to the page with her father's note. Gerald says 4 is standard. Something still reads wrong. Keep watching it. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked up a pen. Below her father's words, in her own handwriting, the same block letters, the same careful pressure. The letters she'd been told her whole life looked exactly like his. She wrote the date. And below the date she wrote, "We kept watching it, Dad. We found it." She put the pen down. She closed the binder. She put it back in its place on the shelf where it had lived for 6 years, where it would stay, because some records were not just documentation. Some records were proof of a life well built and a promise kept across a distance that no one had wanted to cross, but that turned out to be crossable. Because the right things had been written down at the right time by a careful man who raised a careful daughter in a garage on a piece of land no one else had wanted. Carter's Cycles, still standing. Standing. The Star-Telegram reporter arrived at 8:52. Her name was Sandra Voss. And she was younger than Emily had expected, maybe 28. 29 with a recorder in one hand and a notebook in the other, and the specific alertness of someone who had recognized, sometime in the last 18 hours, that what she'd been assigned was bigger than a local interest piece about motorcycles in a parking lot. She looked at the garage sign. She looked at the 6 remaining bikes in the lot. She looked at Emily, standing in her father's leather jacket with a cup of coffee and no prepared statement, and she said, "Thank you for agreeing to this." "I'm not doing this for me," Emily said. "I'm doing it because 11 businesses nearly lost everything and most people don't know it yet." Sandra Voss wrote that down before Emily had finished saying it. Patricia was there, standing slightly behind Emily's left shoulder in the position of someone who was present, but not running the conversation. She had arrived at 8:40 with a revised update from Carver. The federal injunction, been signed by the judge at 7:20 that morning, formally halting all 11 default proceedings. And the investigation had expanded overnight to include 2 additional districts where a related entity structure had been operating under a different name but the same underlying mechanism. Ease. Cross's machine was larger than any of them had fully understood. Ease. Emily did not know all of it yet. Patricia had given her the outline on the walk from the parking lot to the garage door, and she had absorbed it the way she absorbed everything steadily, without performing the weight of it. Ease. But the scale of it was present in her mind while Sandra Voss positioned her recorder, and the morning sun came through the open garage door and fell across the workbench where her father had spent 22 years building something worth stealing. Ease. Tell me about the night it started, Sandra said. Ease. Emily drank her coffee. She set the mug on the workbench. Ease. And she told it straight, no dramatization, no performance, the same plain, honest register she used when she was walking a customer through what had been wrong with their engine and how she'd fixed it. Ease. She told it the way her father had taught her to give estimates. Ease. Tell them what you found. Ease. Tell them what you did. Ease. Tell them what it means going forward. Ease. Don't oversell. Don't undersell. Just tell the truth in the order it happened. Ease. She told Sandra about the rain and the engine sound she'd heard from the road and the way she'd known something was wrong before she saw the headlights swing into her lot. Ease. She told her about getting Dax inside and the head wound and the coffee and the Road King and the brake line she'd found during the inspection. Ease. She told her about keeping the evidence because her father had taught her that documentation was the mechanic's most important tool. Ease. She told her about the Meridian letter in the desk drawer and the notes she'd made at 4 a.m. and the binder in the back room with her father's handwriting on every page. Ease. She told it without once saying I was afraid or I didn't know what to do because both of those things would have been untrue. Ease. She had known what to do. She had done it. Fear was not the engine of this story. Ease. Competence was. Loyalty was. The choice to do the right thing when nobody was watching was. Ease. Sandra Voss wrote constantly. She asked 3 questions, all of them good ones, and Emily answered all 3 directly. Ease. When Sandra asked about the 134 bikers in the parking lot, Emily paused for a moment, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted to say it correctly. Ease. They came because they chose to, Emily said finally. Ease. Nobody asked them to. Nobody organized it as a show of force or a statement. Ease. They came because people in this community have been fighting alone for too long, and somebody finally showed them they didn't have to. She looked at Sandra steadily. Ease. My father used to say that the measure of a community is what it does for the people who need it most. Ease. Those men in the parking lot, they understood that before I did. Ease. Sandra looked up from her notebook. Do you consider them family now? Ease. Emily thought about Dax on the throne stool at midnight with his uneven pupils and his coffee and his absolute refusal to tell her anything less than the truth. Ease. She thought about Marcus sitting at her father's desk for 3 hours with a legal pad and 14 pages of notes and the specific knowledge of a man who had been a paralegal for 8 years before he'd made a different choice about his life. Ease. She thought about Ray holding a light for her in exactly the right place without being told twice. Ease. She thought about Hector, who had not spoken to her all day and then told her about his grandfather's hardware shop in San Antonio, and the community that had shown up and the shop that had still been there 60 years later. Ease. I think family isn't always what you're born into, Emily said. Ease. Sometimes it's what you earn together when something goes wrong, and everyone has to decide what they're going to do about it. She paused. Ease. They decided to show up. That's what family does. Ease. Sandra Voss looked at her recorder and looked at her notebook and looked at Emily Carter standing in the garage her father built. And she said, one more question. Ease. What happens to Carter's cycles now? Emily looked at the sign above the door. Ease. She had thought about this. Ease. In the early morning hours, ease between 4 and 6. Ease. While the lot was quiet outside and the coffee was fresh and the binder was closed, ease. She had thought about what came next, not in the shape of a plan exactly, but in the shape of a direction, ease, which was what her father always said was more important than a plan. Changed. Direction held. It stays open, Emily said. Ease, and it grows. She looked at Sandra. My father built a garage. Ease. I'm going to build what he would have built if he'd had more time. Ease. A place where young mechanics can learn the work the right way hands-on, from someone who knows what they're doing. Ease. A training program. Apprenticeships. She paused. There are kids in this county who are good with their hands and don't know it yet because nobody's given them the right tools and the right environment. My father gave me both. She looked at the garage around her. I'm not keeping this to myself. Sandra stopped writing. She looked at Emily. How old are you? 25, Emily said. Sandra looked at her for another moment. Then she wrote something down. Put the cap on her pen. And said, Thank you, Miss Carter. I think people need to hear this story. I think they do too, Emily said. The article ran online at 2 that afternoon. Patricia texted Emily a link at 2:14. Emily read it at the workbench. Between customers, she had 3 walk-ins that morning. 2 of whom mentioned they'd seen something about the garage on the news. And one of whom was a man named Curtis, who brought in a beat-up 2008 Kawasaki and said, with the directness of someone who had decided in advance to be honest, I heard about what happened here. I want to bring my business to somebody who deserves it. Emily had looked at the Kawasaki, which had clearly been neglected for at least 3 years, and then at Curtis, who was roughly 60 and had the hands of a man who worked outdoors and the eyes of someone who had read the article twice before he drove over. I'll take a look at it, she said. It's going to need some work. Whatever it needs, Curtis said. Price it fair and I'll pay it. I always price it fair, she said. Curtis had nodded. The nod that meant more than a transaction. So the article was running, and the phone was ringing. She had started letting it go to voicemail because she couldn't answer it and work at the same time, and the work was not optional, and 3 new jobs were on the board, and Harlan Cross was At that exact moment, according to a second text from Patricia, in a meeting with his attorneys that was described to Patricia by Carver as not going well for him. The article's headline was, How a Midnight Repair in a Small Denton Garage Exposed a Multi-District Property Fraud Ring. The photograph below the headline was of Emily standing in the garage doorway in her father's leather jacket, the sign visible above her. And Sandra Voss had captured the specific quality of Emily's posture that was almost impossible to fake, the weight-balanced steadiness of a person who knows exactly where they're standing and has decided it's the right place. The article had 4,000 shares by 5 o'clock. Emily didn't know that until later. She was working. Carver called her directly at 4:47. She had never given him her personal number Patricia had. She answered it on the second ring because she recognized the area code. Miss Carter, he said. I wanted to give you an update before it hits the news cycle. She set down her wrench. Go ahead. We executed search warrants this afternoon at Meridian Property Solutions' Fort Worth office, Valley Assessment Services registered location in Irving, and the law office of Gerald Simmons in Denton. A pause. Gerald Simmons has been placed under arrest. Emily stood very still. She had known this was coming. Patricia had told her it was likely. The logical structure of the case made it inevitable. None of that made the sound of it any less heavy when it arrived in the specific ordinary moment of a Tuesday afternoon with a wrench in her hand. Gerald, she said. The evidence at his office confirmed what we suspected, Carver said. He had a referral arrangement with Meridian going back to the initial incorporation. He received payments for directing specific clients toward Meridian financing clients he assessed as having properties, cross-wanted, businesses under sufficient financial pressure to be vulnerable, and insufficient legal sophistication to identify the trap in the agreement. Carver paused. He referred 9 clients to Meridian over 18 months. Your father was the third. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about Gerald saying standard in his easy professional voice, twice, to a man who trusted him. She thought about the specific meanness of it, not the dramatic kind, but the small, calculated, deliberate kind. The kind that looks like help while it builds a prison. She thought about her father writing something still reads wrong in his careful block letters and trusting Gerald anyway, because her father had believed his whole life in giving people the benefit of the doubt. All 9 clients, she said. Covered by the injunction, Carver said. All 9. Some of them weren't on our original list because their agreements hadn't triggered default proceedings yet. They are now protected. A pause. You gave us those 9 when you gave us Gerald. Emily put her hand on the workbench. There's one more thing, Carver said. The individual who sabotaged Walker's brake line. We have a name. He's a private contractor cross-used for the formal term is asset protection consulting. His fingerprints are on 2 previous incidents in the other districts we've now connected to this network. He paused. He was arrested in Fort Worth at 3:15 this afternoon. Emily exhaled. It was the first time she had done that, actually exhaled, released something, since the moment she'd crouched beside the Road King with the flashlight at the specific angle and understood what she was looking at. Thank you, she said, for calling me directly. You're the reason we have this, Carver said. Not just the documentation, not just the binder. He paused, and for the first time his professional neutrality had something genuinely human moving underneath it. You're the reason because you kept the brake line. You labeled it. You dated it. You put it in a bag on a shelf. And you were ready to explain exactly where you'd found it and what it meant. Another pause. Most people, in your position at midnight, with a stranger's motorcycle in their shop and evidence of a crime in their hands, would not have done that. They would have been afraid of what it meant to have done it. My father taught me, Emily said, that evidence doesn't get less important because it's inconvenient. A silence. Smart man, Carver said. The best man I ever knew, she said. For the second time, she had said those exact words to the second person who had used those exact words to ask about him, and they were still completely true. She called Dax. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he had been expecting the call. She told him about Gerald's arrest. She told him about the contractor in Fort Worth. She told him about the 9 additional clients now under the injunction's protection. She told him the way she told Sandra that morning, straight. In order. Without dramatization, and he listened without interrupting. Which was how she had come to understand he listened to things that mattered. When she finished, there was a pause. The contractor, Dax said. He's the man who cut the line. In custody in Fort Worth, she said. Another pause, longer. She waited through it. Okay, he said. Finally. Just that. Okay. The word carrying everything it needed to carry the release of something held for a long time, the decision to let the right process do the right work, the acknowledgement that it had. Dax, she said, it's over. The right way, yeah, he said. His voice was quieter than usual. Not weak, just quiet. The specific quiet of a man setting something down that had been heavy. Yeah, it is. She heard him breathe. How's the garage, he said. Full of work, she said. Curtis brought in a 2008 Kawasaki that's been neglected for 3 years. I've got 2 more jobs coming in Thursday. Phone's been ringing since 2 o'clock. She paused. I'm going to need help, a beat. What kind of help? Dax said. The kind that knows one end of a wrench from the other, she said. I've been thinking about what I told the reporter this morning. The apprenticeship program, teaching young mechanics. She paused. I can't build that alone. I need people who believe in it. How many people, Dax said. Start small, she said. 2 or 3 apprentices, someone to help with the business side. I'm a good mechanic and a bad accountant, and I've known that about myself for years. A pause. And I need someone who knows how to find the right people. Who to trust. Who's serious about the work. Marcus, Dax said immediately. I was thinking Marcus, she said. He's been talking about doing something different for 2 years, Dax said. Something that uses both sides of what he knows. A pause. I'll talk to him. Tell him I can't pay him what a paralegal makes, she said. Tell him yourself, Dax said. He respects people who say their own numbers. Fair, she said. There was a moment of quiet between them, not uncomfortable, not loaded. Just the specific quality of silence that exists between 2 people who have been through something difficult together and come out the other side knowing each other in the way that only that kind of experience produces. Emily, Dax said. Yeah, your father would be. He stopped. Started again. He built something worth protecting. You protected it. A pause. And now you're going to build something worth protecting on top of it. Ease. He stopped again. And she understood that this was a man who had not said words like the ones he was trying to say very often, and she gave him the time to find them. Ease. That's what it's supposed to look like, he said finally. Ease. When things go right. That's what it's supposed to look like. Ease. Emily looked at the sign above the door. Yeah, she said. Ease. I think so too. 3 months later, Carter's Cycles had 3 apprentices. Ease. The first was a 17-year-old named Deshawn, who had been referred by a teacher at the Denton High School who had watched him take apart and reassemble the school's broken lawnmower during a study hall and decided someone should know about him. Ease. Deshawn had walked in with his hands in his pockets and his eyes taking in everything and said almost nothing for the first 2 weeks. And then one afternoon, Emily had handed him a diagnostic problem on a customer's bike and walked away. Ease. And when she came back 40 minutes later, he had found the fault, documented it on the work order in clean block letters, and was waiting to explain his reasoning. Ease. She had given him the raise she'd planned to give him after 3 months. Ease. She gave it after 6 weeks. Ease. The second was a woman named Carmen. Ease. 22. Ease. Who had been doing shade tree mechanics on her own cars since she was 14 and had never been taken seriously because of where she'd learned and what she looked like. Ease. And who had heard about Carter's Cycles from a cousin who had heard about it from someone who had read the article. Ease. Carmen had precise hands and no tolerance for being underestimated, and an ability to work in companionable silence that Emily recognized immediately as a professional virtue. Ease. The third was a retired postal worker named Earl, 58, who had been restoring vintage bikes as a hobby for 20 years and wanted to learn the professional side of it. Ease. He was slower than the other two and more careful than anyone. And Emily had decided inside the first week that Earl's carefulness was worth more than speed in a training environment. And she had been correct. Ease. Marcus had come aboard 6 weeks after the arrest, managing the business side with the focused efficiency of a man who had spent years watching small operations make the same preventable errors and had a very clear idea of how to fix them. He had negotiated his own rate, as Dax predicted he would, and it was fair in both directions. And within 3 weeks, he had restructured Emily's invoicing system, her parts ordering process, and her appointment scheduling in ways that saved her 4 hours a week and increased her cash flow enough that the apprenticeship stipends were sustainable without supplemental funding. The Meridian case had moved through the federal system with the momentum of something that had been building pressure for a long time and finally found its release point. Harlan Cross had been indicted on 18 counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Gerald Simmons had pled guilty to 4 counts of fraud and was cooperating with prosecutors. The private contractor who had cut Dax's brake line was facing federal charges in connection with similar incidents in 2 other districts. Valley Assessment Services had been dissolved by court order. The 11 businesses that had been targeted were all still operating, their financing agreements voided by a federal court ruling that found the 3-provision template to be a deliberately engineered instrument of fraud. Frank Kowalski's machine shop was running extra shifts to catch up on backlogged orders. Rosie's Diner had a waiting list on Friday nights. The body shop in Gainesville had hired 2 new employees. And Patricia Dunn had been approached by attorneys in 3 additional districts who had clients dealing with related entity structures the machine Cross had built, had tentacles Emily hadn't known about, and the work of dismantling it was ongoing. And Patricia was doing that work with the precise, focused energy of a former federal prosecutor who had found, in the case of a small garage in Denton, Texas, the thing that reminded her why she'd gone into law in the first place. Emily learned about the additional districts from Patricia over coffee one morning. Patricia had started stopping by the garage on Tuesdays, not for any formal reason, just because she was in the area and the coffee was reliable, and she had absorbed the information with the quiet clarity of someone who had stopped being surprised by how large the world turned out to be once you started actually looking at it. Cross built a Predator's machine, Patricia said. It was elegant in a terrible way. The overlapping entities, the attorney pipeline, the manufactured appraisals. He spent years building it and thought it was invulnerable because the individual targets were all isolated. She drank her coffee. Ease. He didn't account for the possibility that one target would fix the brake line and keep the brake line and know exactly what the brake line meant. Ease. He didn't account for my father's binder, Emily said. Ease. He didn't account for 22 years of meticulous records kept by a man who taught his daughter that documentation was the mechanic's most important tool, Patricia said. Ease. No, he didn't account for that. Ease. On a Thursday evening in late October, Dax Walker rode into the Carter's Cycles lot for the first time since the day the 134 had come. He wasn't alone. Marcus was with him and Ray, and two others, but it was quieter than before. More like a visit than an arrival. Emily was in the garage finishing the last job of the day. A routine service on a customer's Road King that she had let Deshawn lead while she supervised. And Deshawn had done it correctly and professionally. And she had signed off on the work order with the feeling she had every time that happened, the specific satisfaction of watching competence develop in someone who hadn't known they had it yet. She heard the bikes and came to the door, and Dax was standing in the lot looking at the sign the way he'd looked at it the first time, and then he looked at her. Heard you took on apprentices, he said. 3 of them, she said. Deshawn, Carmen, and Earl. How are they? Deshawn is going to be better than me in 2 years, she said. Carmen already is at diagnostics. Earl is the most careful person I've ever worked with, including my father. She paused. I got lucky. You got what you were looking for, Dax said. That's not luck, she looked at him. He had the Road King, the same one. The one she'd repaired on the night that started all of it, and it was running clean. She could hear that from here. The engine voice even and settled, and exactly right. How's the bike, she said. Perfect, he said. Same as the day you handed it back to me. Good work holds, she said. Her father's phrase. It came out automatically, the way his phrases always did, embedded so deep in her from the years of hearing them that they had become part of her own voice. Dax looked at her for a moment. He'd be proud, he said. He's direct, no ceremony, just the fact of it, plainly stated. Emily held the words. She had heard variations of this many times in the past 3 months from customers. From the article's readers who had written to the garage email address. From Patricia, from people she had never met who had followed the case and felt moved to say something. Each time she heard it, she received it carefully. The way you receive something fragile, and held it for as long as it needed to be held, and then she kept working. Because keeping working was the tribute. Not the grief, not the pause, not the acknowledgement. Though she did all of those too. The tribute was the work continuing. I know he would be, she said. No performance in it. Dax nodded once. We're taking a ride, he said. North on 380. A few of us. Nothing organized. He looked at her. You want to come? Emily looked at the garage. The last job was done. Deshawn was cleaning up his station with the focused thoroughness she'd taught him. Carmen had already gone for the day. Earl was putting tools back in their places on the wall, the same places they'd always been. The system her father had built, which Earl had learned in his first week and had never deviated from. She looked at the lot. She looked at the sign. She thought about Route 380 North and mile marker 12 and a single headlight swinging wide and unsteady out of the rain and the sound of a damaged engine that had brought her running to her garage door without thinking about it because something needed help and she had the skills to help it. And that was all the reason she had ever needed. She took her father's leather jacket off the hook by the door. She put it on. Deshawn, she said, lock up when you're done. Set the alarm. Leave the work order for the Road King on the desk. Deshawn looked up. He looked at Dax. He looked at the bikes in the lot. He looked at Emily in the leather jacket with the worn elbows. He was 17 years old and he had very good instincts. Yes, ma'am, he said. Emily walked out into the October evening. She stopped beside Dax and looked at the Road King, the machine that had come into her lot damaged and wrong and had gone back out, correct and true. And she looked at the road beyond the lot, Route 380, running north into the dark, east. The same road she had watched a headlight travel down at midnight months ago when everything began. Please, I don't have a bike, she said. Dax looked at her. Please. Then he reached into his vest pocket and held out a single key. Please. She looked at it. She looked at him. In the back of Ray's trailer, he said, Please. 1998 Sportster. Belonged to a man who doesn't need it anymore. Please. Needs some work. Emily took the key. She felt the weight of it in her palm, the small, specific weight of a thing that contained a direction. Please, she looked at Dax. It needs work, she said. That's why we brought it to you, he said. Please. She closed her hand around the key. Emily Carter had opened a garage door at midnight for a stranger in the rain because he needed help, and she had the skills to provide it, and there had never been any other question worth asking. Please. She had found a cut brake line and labeled the evidence because her father had taught her that documentation was the mechanic's most important tool. Please. She had made notes at 4 in the morning and kept a binder and told the truth in a federal building and stood in a parking lot full of motorcycles and watched 134 people choose to show up. Please. She had built something with all of it, not just saved what her father had built, but built something new on top of it. Please. Something that would outlast her the way Carter's cycles had outlasted Walter Carter. Please. Because the things built right and maintained well and passed on with care are the things that last. Please. The garage was behind her. The sign was above the door. Please. The key was in her hand. Please. She walked to the trailer to look at the 1998 Sportster. Please. And she already knew what it needed. Please. And she already knew she could fix it. Please. And she already knew it would run right when she was done because good work holds. Please. And careful people build things that last. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness at the darkest hour is not the end of anything but the beginning of everything worth keeping. Please. Carter Cycles was open. Carter Cycles was always going to be open, and that was never going to change.